whitetail are probably, in my mind anyways, they're one of the most beautiful creatures that God ever created. And, those of us that hunt, a magnificent buck is a mesmerizing thing. And where they live, for me, I know that whitetails live in tremendous variations in environments, but here in the Adirondacks, they live in these beautiful mountains, and when you can go up on these beautiful mountains and hunt all day looking for a buck, to get a buck is just icing on the cake. To be just up in God's creation, enjoying it. And most of where I hunt, Cody, you've been up there with me. Everywhere you turn, you're looking out over tremendous vistas.
It's beautiful. And
the whole terrain, the whole place where they live is like a giant puzzle. And we're up there trying to figure them out. And when you're successful, it's rewarding. But the process is wonderful. You're just up there matching wits with a mature whitetail is just fantastic.
Here we go. Well, Jim, it is an absolute pleasure to be here at your cabin, sitting across the table from you, and about to discuss whitetail buck hunting. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm thrilled to have you. You know that, Cody. We've become dear friends.
It's great to hear you say that, and I don't take it for granted. I've had the honor of spending enough time with you over the last couple of years, going brook trout fishing, watching you make a black ash pack basket, going to church with you, and I've seen the way that people in this community hang on your words, hang around after church, waiting just to get a word with you, maybe try to find a fishing spot, learn a tip or two. People really respect you around here, and it's not hard for me to see why. And so it's a real honor to have you willing to just share all your knowledge with us and let me share that with the people here, our WeatherWool audience. So thank you so much. Jim and I just finished eating some bear heart and fried onions and butter right before we sat down to do this. We went out for a still hunt, not yesterday, but the day before, and came across a black bear, and it was pouring rain, and I just saw Jim drop down to one knee, and I looked out the direction he was looking, and sure enough, there was a critter on a rock, and he switched into stealth mode and snuck in behind a tree, and next thing I knew, I heard the gun go off and saw that black bear drop, and we walked straight to that bear, and it was done, and it's a big, beautiful bear. So we feasted on the heart right before we got started.
Yeah,
it was a great way to kind of kick off our first night at the cabin.
Yeah, Cody's what he did with the heart was just great. Sliced it thin, and it was cooked over my wood stove here, and with onions and butter. It was delicious, absolutely delicious. We devoured the whole thing.
Yeah, we sure did. Told me a very humorous story about you patterning a buck when you were 13 years old, and telling your big brother about it. And a big brother invites another guy, and someone else ended up killing your buck that you had patterned.
Yeah,
but
not real happy about it, but that's the way that works sometimes.
Yeah, to be 13 years old and starting to kind of know the buck's gonna come out right there at this time. You were in tune with this stuff at a pretty young age.
Yeah, I started as a trapper, and you really have to learn everything about everything that walks and crawls and lives in the woods, and deer are all part of that, and they're a fascinating animal. And so, yeah, if you immerse yourself in God's creation, it's just endless. And yeah, I was all excited. I had a pretty junky, I bought for $15. It was a diamond arm 16 gauge shotgun. And it didn't have a front sight on it. It had a screw that had been screwed in there and filed around a little bit. But it was mine, and I had slugs in it, and I was ready to go. And I patterned this deer, and a dear friend of the family that happened to want to go with us happened to be put on the best spot and got it. But it doesn't matter. It was a thrill. It was a thrill for all of us, and it was kind of neat. So
You said something funny to me when we were hunting, and that was that not all bucks read the same books.
oh, yeah.
Meaning they all going to act differently. So I think what's really important for the viewers here is also, not all hunters should be reading the same books either. The environment that you're hunting in dramatically dictates everything that you do, whether that's how much you're calling, scent control, how fast you're moving, all of it. So can you describe the atmosphere that we're hunting in?
Well, it's big woods. There's nothing farmland about it. Bucks are not constrained by roads or any kind of man-made structures or industry or anything of that nature. We're in the middle of large wilderness areas, or on the edge of them, I should say. But we penetrate well into wilderness areas. As you know, Siamese Ponds Wilderness is probably my favorite area. I had a wall tent 30 years in there. The more remote it is, the better I like it. I like to be back in the wilderness. I just love it back in there. I've had people go with me, friends of mine, that after one trip said, "It's not for me, Jim. The woods are too big." Just not comfortable. And I understand that. Not everybody looks at it the same way. And I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And so, yeah, it is mountainous terrain. We went through some pretty steep country. You see what I'm talking about, Cody, with these ledges? If you come out of here in the dark and you didn't have this, you slip right here, you drop 100 feet.
How much time do you spend post-season scouting? A lot of guys talk about how that's an important time to be doing scouting. Are you doing much of that?
If you have the time to be able to go back in and even look over some areas maybe that you didn't hunt but close proximity, you may find an area where, wow, I kind of overlooked this, and this is a really good buck area. But to be honest with you, I know the mountains that I hunt, they take a while to learn them, but I've learned them well. I know a lot about the mountains. Now, deer change their habits from year to year, and that's all dictated by feed. And what I do is I don't spend a lot of time postseason. I wish I had the time. You have to make a living, so you always have to make compromises. And I know Cody asked me if I hunt opening day, and I just smiled at him and said, every hunt opening day I've hunted except this year. It was my grandson's second birthday. And so I went to the birthday party instead of hunting on opening day.
Good for you, Grandpa. I was trick-or-treating on Halloween while my friends were hunting, but I don't regret it.
No, some things are, yeah. Scrapes. You can look at a scrape and say, okay, it is a scrape, but it's probably not one that they're revisiting a lot. Generally, there's a hanging branch, or at least an overhanging, usually a beech in this neck of the woods, or a striped maple or something. But there's usually a limb where they can get at it and pull it down. Now, they're not always broken. Oftentimes you'll see, they'll tell you, this will be broke. And oftentimes they hang right there. They swing kind of freely. But oftentimes they're not. But if you look carefully at the branches, over a scrape, you might see where the teeth grabbed it in one spot. And the bark will be off of it right there, and they'll pull it down, they'll move it. I've watched them a little bit, and, I was showing you on that video that I took at that one scrape. The buck appeared to me to be pulling that down in the side of the branch. He was pulling it right down so it was right against his face. And it appears that he's getting the orbital gland right here by the eye involved on the limb to leave that scent behind. And so you don't always see it broken, but you generally, if they're using the scrape heavily, you will see little bite marks along where they got a hold of it. They don't have much teeth in the front, just a little, and they grab that thing and they pull it down and they try to pull it right against their head and their face. And it's got to be what they're doing. It's getting that preorbital gland on there.
You're not afraid of touching it and stepping in it?
No. I mean, I would not, I wouldn't hunt this scrape to begin with.
Why not?
Well, this is a good location for other reasons, Cody. But I would not say that it's a scrape that several bucks are going to be patrolling and checking out. This is a buck came up through here, but the doe traffic comes up through here, and he's just letting them know, he's getting ready, and he's pumped up a little bit, and he threw some leaves back as a kind of a minor scrape. I'm sure he probably peed in it, and then he was on his way. This is as classic as you get a scrape. Come here. There's your licking branch. That's a good size scrape. I think the other branch, see there's two of them there, Cody, that are turned over. But that one on the end has been recently pulled down and almost broken off. But that is your classic scrape with a licking branch. And if they don't have those, generally they're not worth sitting on. I'm not a big scrape sitter anyways, but the ones with the licking branch are revisited often. I would rather sit on a really good rub line.
Are you doing much preseason scouting? If so, you worried about scent control when you're out there scouting? What are you looking for?
No, I know there's a lot of discussion about scent control, and there's probably some valid reasons. Depending on where you hunt. I do think scent control is an overblown issue. I think that in areas where there's a lot of people and a lot of deer smell people all the time. That's not to say that you should go stomping through a buck bedroom on a repeated basis. I think it can affect their movements. Where I hunt, it's big country. I mean, it's really big country. And, if I have time, I do a lot of things, and I've over the years, I've spent a lot of time in the woods sometimes, looking for areas where I would trap. I've always been a ginseng hunter. And these are things that put you out there. And so you're always looking for deer sign. And I can remember hunting Shang way up on the mountains and walking right up on a fantastic buck. He heard me, stood up, but he didn't know where I was. And I'm looking at him at 50, less than that, probably 30, 40 feet. And he's right on the top of a little rise looking straight down. And I'm going, nice 10-pointer. But, to say that I spend a lot of time preseason hunting, I don't. But I am in the woods. And so I'm always looking. And if I have the opportunity to get up on the mountains that I hunt, I do that. And as I said before, for me, early season, that muzzle loading season, I've even, as awkward as it is, I've carried a bow or a crossbow. The crossbow is the most awkward weapon I think I've ever used. And the only reason I have one is, you get old. I had cancer, and the year that ended, I told Lori, I said, well, I'll get a doe with a bow. And then I went to just practice with my bow and found out I couldn't draw it. It took 45 pounds of muscle off me. I couldn't pull my bow. I was disgusted, but there's not much you can do about it. And, by the next year I was able to build back up and use the bow, and then my rotator cuff went. And it's just old age, and now I got the other rotator cuff has got to be operated on, as well as the hip. But, yeah, that's just the way it goes. I would say normally I really start the beginning of muzzle loading season.
Okay. And
I hunt pretty hard, and I'm really looking. I like to take a doe right away. And there are places down closer to town, places where, I know all these places well. And if I can get a nice doe for the freezer, that's my objective right off the bat. And I always like to do that with a bow before when I was able to. And that's sweet because then muzzleloading season opens and I can concentrate on trying to shoot a buck with the muzzleloader. And but even there's been seasons where I did not get a doe right away because my concentration was trying to find where the bucks were. And part of that is finding where the does are, of course. But generally, maybe in a mountain that I hunt way back off the road, it's not necessarily where I'm going to shoot a doe. I don't drag deer. I have many times over the years, but generally I cut them up. But, sometimes I look at the area where I hunt and these big matriarch does. That's what the bucks are chasing. I don't want to. I don't want to take them out of the equation. That's when I start scouting. Really, is muzzleloading season, and what I'm trying to do is find the feed. Now, I want to preface it. I did go out a little bit, just hiking up in some areas where there's oak and where there's beech nuts before the season opened. No weapon. I just went up looking to see. Do we have a beech nut crop? Do we have any acorns? And this year I found we have both. I talked to other buddies of mine. I said, the beech nuts are really spotty. Some people said, all the acorns were full of worms. Well, that varies from location to location. The areas that I looked at were, the acorns were good, and there were a lot of them, and the beech nuts were very good. And the more I've hunted this year, the more I realized, wow, the beech nuts are really good, and they're all over. And, that kind of makes deer disperse. Oaks kind of concentrate them a little bit. If in your area you don't have a lot of oak and you have some concentrations of oak, that's where you find the deer. But I did look to see whether we had those crops or not, and found that we did, which is a big plus. And then, you go in muzzleloading season and you find does are usually found around where we're feeding. And, when they get into heat, the bucks are there too. But the bucks are very close by, and we'll talk about it as we go along here. But knowing the woods, knowing your mountains is really key to the whole thing.
You did say that scent control is overblown, and I know from conversation with you in the past and conversation we had earlier was, that again comes down to your environment that you're hunting in.
It does. You don't want to be wandering all through it all the time. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
These are big woods here. I wander all over in the off season and even early season looking. I don't think that it alerts bucks as much as perhaps a lot of magazine articles would lead you to believe. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to scent control. And certainly you would not get gasoline on your clothes or, pump your gas on your way to go hunting and all that. There are things that you have to be careful about. And, I wouldn't have your clothes around other foreign odors, and I wouldn't go be working on your car and then throw that jacket on and go in the woods. Deer have tremendous noses. I think that we have an understanding of how good they smell, and that makes us think that they are afraid of everything when they smell a human, and that's not the case, because in some areas they smell humans all the time, every day. A human close by, maybe in their bedding area, could very well be a problem, But they do smell some foreign odors too. I know you talked about wood smoke on clothes and whatever. You're in an urban area, probably a lot of smoke in the air, and it's probably not a smell that's unnatural to them. I think that if you're up on the mountain here and you purposely smoked your clothes, it would be an odor that would be foreign to a buck way up on the mountain. Might be something that he would alert on. I do think sometimes when you read magazine articles that you can get the impression that whitetail bucks are superhuman, and they're not human at all. We do have the ability to outsmart them, and I'm not saying they're not very smart. They are, and they have very good noses. Fortunately, they don't have eyesight to match their noses, but they're pretty sharp in every way.
So we just had those 2 does come right up here. I got a shot of them down there, but they were, what, 20 feet?
Yeah.
And I didn't swing on them, so we didn't get that close-up shot, but they were standing right there, right beside us. We both froze, and they just stood there.
Yeah, they
and
never saw us. They certainly had to have smelled us. The wind was blowing right to them. They never blew and ran. You know, they just, and that's the point of it, trying to make wind and thermals and all that are very important to pay attention to, but they don't always hold true.
Yeah.
And deer don't always spook when
you
they
could
smell
have swung and shot those does, no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's the thing. Guys get discouraged because they're told over and over and over in articles that if the wind betrays you, you're all done, and it's just not so. You have to be out there and you have to be hunting.
Yeah.
And this is one of the corridors I spoke to you about.
Yeah.
And they're right on cue, right up through the corridor.
Yeah.
And you could see that when they were a little bit antsy, they kind of wanted to go that way, but no, that wasn't their original intent. So they kept on they turned and went the course they were going to go, which is right up through there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then we sat down, thinking just in case there's a buck following them, let's just chill out for a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About, I think we've been here 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've killed bucks just that way.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Cool. What about beautiful spot to sit and wait for a bit?
Oh my goodness, you guys nesters are a wonderful place.
Yeah.
Most often you're hunting with a rifle, but you're usually filling bow tags, muzzle loading tags, rifle tags, your local region, sometimes in the southern tier. You're not just exclusively a rifle hunter. You're doing it all.
Right. You know, some years I kill 1 or 2 deer. Some years I kill 3. Some years I kill, well, one year I killed 7, you know, because you're allowed, you know, you got your 3 tags, your muzzle loader, your bow, and your regular tag. And I want to make it clear, I don't fill anybody else's tags. You can get 2 doe permits, and then you can get 2 signed over to you. And I had, you know, being in the business, I had customers that, you know, knew I was a hunter and loved to do it and feed my family with the venison. And they'd say, just tell me what units you want. I'm going to buy my license solely so that I can get 2 doe permits for you and assign them over to you. And so I don't think there's almost never been a year where I didn't have 4 tags. But, you know, that's a great thing to be, you know, we're flush with tags to do it legally. So I just feel like why would anybody shoot more than they were allowed to?
You multiply 4 tags on average by 50 years. That's a lot of deer.
It is a lot of deer.
Jim can be modest, but he's even filled tags through cancer treatment. There was a year that it was a tough year, but he still managed to get a doe and a buck.
The Lord brought me a little buck, which was great. I mean, yeah, I could hardly get around. And I just briefly want to say that I shot it, and I was thinking before I shot it that it was going to be hard for me to drag it the 75 yards up to where I could get it more readily. And the deer, normally they go downhill, and it ran uphill and actually ran all the way up to an access road and dropped dead right in the middle of the road. You know, backwoods, my property road. But yeah. And so all I had to do was walk out half a mile, get my truck, and open the gate and drive in, turn it around, and which was a tremendous blessing when you're recovering from cancer treatment and you're pretty weakened. But yes, that was a blessing from the Lord. When you're up in the spot that I'm going to show you, it's perfect for the morning. But when you're down this side of where that is, it's just the opposite. Because of the way your thermals roll down in the evening, they come down through here. And then the bucks, they only have to travel this corridor here, and they're off of the runway. But they know whether there's a doe in heat using that because they can smell it. And they just go about their business unless they smell something, then they turn and go up through. Of course, you sit right there. There's Deer travel right up through this corridor. One year, Cody, last day of the season, I passed up 2 small bucks. And I'm thinking, I should have put one in the freezer, you know. And I said, well, you didn't, Jim, so it's no big deal. I was sitting right here. I'd come down off the mountain. I'd been hunting all day. I was pretty exhausted. I sat down there. I think I had about 15, 20 minutes to sunset. And I found myself just sitting there praying and thanking God for a good season, being able to be out and enjoying His creation and getting a lot of exercise. And just thanking Him for that. And I said, even though no buck, Lord, I'm really thankful. And I looked at my watch. I said, yeah, about 10 minutes. I'd get up and get out of here. I don't think it was a full minute. I catch motion. Here comes a buck right down out of here. Throw up on him. Bang. Ran down in here and dropped. I said, Lord, you got a sense of humor. Yeah.
What's your gear? What are you using for a rifle? What are you packing out there? What are you wearing? Give me like a little pack overview.
You know, I probably carry a little more than a lot of guys. I know a lot of guys run and gun. And I think I ran and gunned a little bit more when I was young, which means packing fairly light. But, you know, my background is I was a ranger for years, and I always think of what if you run into somebody that needs, you know, help or whatever. So I've always got, I carry a pack, a fairly decent one. You know, you hefted it. I don't know what it weighs. It's not, you know, it's gotten lighter because I leave some stuff behind. Now with the physical issues that I have, there's a couple items that I always make sure that I have in the pack because, you know, I could end up dislocating the bad hip and end up spending the night or more if you're a long ways back in. And so, you know, I do bring, you know, there's safety blankets and then there's good ones. I carry one. It's a little heavier than the cheap ones that you buy, but the cheap ones you buy aren't quite the same. You know, you could make a small structure to put over you in a pouring rain with these space blankets. They're pretty darn good. I carry a little cordage with me. It's probably 40, 50 feet. It doesn't weigh anything really. You're able to, you know, the corners don't have grommets on a space blanket, but, you know, a very small rock or even a small chunk of wood into the corner, cord tied around it becomes a nice tie-on. You can make a little shelter out of it. I do have an SOL bivy sack. Those things are unbelievable. I tested mine out when I first got it just to see. I went out on the porch, you know, cold weather. Just a pair of long johns, climbed into it. It's got reflective coating on it. The exterior of it is a Gore-Tex fabric, so you don't, if it was raining and you weren't fully under this little space blanket or whatever, I think it would save your life for sure overnight. Those are nice items. The best thing you can do is build a fire and have the knowledge and the ability to make a fire and keep one going. It can be difficult in heavy snow or really super wet conditions, heavy rain. So they're a good thing to have with you. You know, I always carry matches. I carry a map and compass of the area. I don't carry a GPS. I've tried them, fooled with them a little bit. Just not my thing. I know mountains and I know how to read maps really well. I don't take a compass out very often, but I've certainly in fog or snow or whatever, I take them out when I need a reference, and sometimes you're going the wrong way. I've had way back in on further in ranges. Lord, let the clouds clear just long enough to go, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not going down I'm not starting to head off this mountain in the right direction. And then you get your compass out and you go, yeah, wow, you can get turned around in the snow and the fog and whatever. And you get yourself oriented. But, you know, don't go out without your map and compass with you, even if you think you're just going to stroll up here. Put stuff in a pack. I have what I call a ditty bag that everything goes in. They're a waterproof gas mask bag. I bought one for my son, Daniel, when he was a young, probably 10 years old. He's still carrying it, and I do too. And they snap closed, no zippers, and they're super waterproof, and they hold everything that you need to put in it. I do carry a little bit of first aid stuff. Of course, matches and fire starter are something that I carry in my pack with me. Pretty important stuff. If you're stuck out there, you better be able to build a fire. And I would recommend, if you don't do that, if you haven't done that, you should fool around with it at home, in the backyard or whatever, and get used to building a fire and understanding what makes them go. And there's a lot of people out there can't build a fire, and it's a pretty simple thing to learn, but it's a super important thing to keep you alive in the woods. Hunting knives, I carry one fixed blade, not a long blade. I think the blade is about 4 inches, and anywhere from 3 1/4 to 4 1/2 is about right. Long blades don't help you in any way. I like carbon steel, just the right carbon steel. They're easy to sharpen. They hold an edge pretty well. Stainless is much harder to sharpen when it does get dull. And I carry a fixed blade. I have a number of knives. I'm sure everybody realizes that, but I do have my favorites, and really high quality carbon steel. And then I don't go anywhere without a muskrat knife. I have one I've had for years. I've skinned an unbelievable number of critters with it. It goes everywhere in my pack. It has its own I have one of those little squeeze it and slide it in leather covers on it. It just drops in there. I carry a very small honing stone, very, very fine. And if you feel the blade start to drag at all, you can and it comes right back. The muskrat knife is invaluable. I take my deer apart in the woods. If you were going to cape it out, I leave the cape all together on a buck, leave the neck roast in it, and cape it down, behind the forward shoulders and bring it forward, and then cut the neck off, and bring it out whole, because I love my bucks. I enjoy the head intact. And, all the bucks I've shot, I'm still just like a kid in a candy store. I've got a shelf in my woodshed, which is attached to the house, that, the glass going out in the woodshed. You flick on the light and you're looking through the glass to my little shelf with a nice buck on it. You just love it. And Lori will tell you, I'm like a kid in the candy store. 6, 8 times in the evening after killing a nice buck, I'll go out and flick it on. Yeah, nice buck, and shut it off. But yeah, so I carry 2 knives and make sure they're sharp when you go out. And I carry 4 of the huge 2.5-gallon Ziploc bags. You can debone an entire big buck and fit it into 4 of those Ziplocs. They don't rip. They're really good. You load them up, boy, they got a lot of weight in them. And I slide them right into the pack. I tie flagging, which I carry with me, to the horns of the buck, because you don't want to get shot. I drape the cape right around my shoulders. Put a sling on my rifle, which I have a sling in my pack with me. I do not carry a rifle with a sling on it. I think the tendency to put it on your shoulder is great. I see a lot of guys in the woods with them on their shoulders, and if the gun's not ready in your hands to shoot a buck, not much good to you. So I don't carry a rifle with a sling on it. I put the sling in my pack, and when I pack a deer out, I put it on it, and then I can put it across my chest, and my hands are free with the I can slide my hand through a rack and lock my hands in front of me with the rifle in here. It works pretty well. I've taken, I think, about 40 or 45 bucks out of the woods in a pack, debone the whole thing, shot bucks as far as 6 or 7 miles or a little further from the road, debone the whole thing, put it in a pack, tie all the clothing to the pack, and carry it right out of the woods. and sure beats dragging them. I've dragged a couple very long distance out of the woods, and you know, you get them out to the road and you go, I don't think I'm ever doing this again. So, and that was really the catalyst for taking them apart. I know the first one I did, I said, yep, I'll cut the horns out of this thing and carry it out. And boy, I just felt so cheated not having the head. You know, there's something beautiful about a buck. And to cut the horns out, I got home and I go, yeah, it's a nice buck. But man, did I get cheated out of looking at him, you know. And so that's what I do. I leave the cape all, the head intact and bring it out that way. Clothing, you know, I carry a fair amount of stuff. You know, if I know it's going to rain and rain hard, you know, I do carry rain gear. There's no reason. I've got WeatherWool. I love this stuff. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about it, but if I didn't think it was the best wool out there, I wouldn't be wearing it. I just, it's great stuff. It can snow on you all day. I've taken it off and gone, unbelievable, my shoulders aren't even damp. But at any rate, I carry rain gear. Sometimes the weather is such, you know what, if you get caught out there, it's pretty nice to have your wool dry if it's pouring out. And, you know, I use high quality Gore-Tex, fairly light, but also fairly rugged. I use the, you know, I won't give you brands, but I do use good quality rain gear. I've got rain pants and rain coat. And if I know it's really going to pour, then I have it. And, you know, I'm not worried about the noise that the Gore-Tex makes when you, it does have a brush finish on it. It's pretty quiet for rain gear. But when it's pouring out, you don't make much noise. You really don't. And so it's better to be dry. Well, you know, I put on rain pants when I was
Taking
apart that bear, and boy, it was a lifesaver because it was pouring, and I'm kneeling on the wet ground, and it was great.
Yeah.
But I do carry. I wear all wool. I wear merino wool base layers. It would go under my WeatherWool, and then, you know, you wear something like this. I love my Anorak. They're just, boy, if that wind is blowing, I'm getting to be an old man. It's pretty nice to be able to flip that hood up, and it's just great. And even if it's not super cold out, I can strip down to just a very thin base layer. I don't even need it on, and put the Anorak over it. It is comfortable. The thing with a quality wool like that is there's no itch. So, you know, I can put my Anorak on, you know.
Yeah.
Just slide it over the bare skin and go. There's no itch. It's wonderful stuff.
That's what ended up happening with me yesterday. I came back cabin to grab some stuff, and I was sweating. I just took off all my base layers and put my Anorak back on, bare skin, headed back into the rain, and
his pants, and that was it. Headed back up in the rain, and I finished the bear, and it was pretty neat ordeal. Of course, it's well after dark, and it's pouring down rain, and you know, we both got back. We were both quite comfortable and soaked right to the bone, but it was a great. Yeah, it's a great adventure, you know.
Sure. Yeah, it was awesome.
It was a beautiful bear.
Yeah, dragging that bear, you know, dragging the skull and the cape out, and I just had the jacquard pants over bare skin and the Anorak on bare skin, and I was like, I'm so happy for WeatherWool right now. I feel fantastic. Yeah. I don't remember if I was wet or dry because I was comfortable.
Comfortable, that's the key, you know, and that's the thing with wool. And there's such a range, too, of temperatures you're comfortable in it, you know. I've been out on a pond fishing in fairly warm weather with it on, and still comfortable. It's great heat regulating. It's good fabric. But anyway,
you want to talk about your rifle?
Yeah, I hunt with I'm a lefty, so, you know, and I've hunted with a lot of rifles. I am very particular about the caliber that I hunt with, and I'm not knocking any other calibers, but I know what works for me. And you know, I started out like everybody else with Grandpa's old 30-30 Winchester, and I killed deer with it. But, you know, as things went along, I bought other calibers, and, you know, there's definitely some issues with bullets that are pushed too fast. And, you know, I could speak for hours on that subject, but I'm not going to because it takes too much time. But I hunt with a 358 Winchester, and I love it. I think it's just the ideal round. It's pushing a 200 grain bullet. Of course, you're starting at 35 caliber, which is pretty good diameter on it. And don't let anybody tell you that a 358 is a short-range gun. It is not. You kill a whitetail at 250 yards if you could see one up here at that, but 250-yard shots don't exist here where I hunt on the mountains, but it will reach out and touch them if you need to. But the 358 is a wonderful round. It's pushing a 200-grain bullet at 2,600 feet a second. I hand load for it. I love it. Everything I've done my part on, locked the crosshairs on, didn't go anywhere. The 358 never had bullet failure. Most of them go through. I like a blood trail. I like it to go right straight through, out the other side, expand pretty good. Occasionally, I find a bullet on the off shoulder or under the hide sometimes. The hide stretches just enough and it's lost its propulsion, hitting bone and whatever on the way through. But I've saved them all. I got a whole box full of them, all labeled and with the load and everything on them. And I'm just convinced that it is about the ideal whitetail caliber out there. I like 35 caliber bullets, and I know U.S. hunters aren't thrilled with 35 calibers. I have no idea why, but boy, I tell you, they're dynamite. And there's a lot of guys out there that are very knowledgeable that use them and go, wow, great rifles. But for some reason, it never took hold. I don't care. I mean, I got my 358 and I love it. It's a Model 88 Winchester. It's an old gun. It's worth a lot of money. Pretty beat up because I hunt with it, and I've refinished the stock 5-6 times, and it needs it again. But it kills me a beautiful whitetail every year, and it's just a great round.
What about calls? You packing any calls? You packing rattling antlers?
I don't pack rattling antlers. I've used them. I've actually called deer in with them. When I first started playing around with rattling horns, I remember taking them up on top of a mountain. I love to hunt high and go in the dark. I get up there and I was rattling away with those things, and after a little while I'd rattle again, and at some point I said, it's been quite a while here. I got to stand up and take a leak, and I went to stand up, and the moment I did, the deer blew at me from directly behind me. And I'm sure I called it in. It was probably looking at me like, what is that down there? And when I stood up, he took off, and I had to laugh. I said, well, it worked. And, I don't know if it was buck or doe, but, it will call both. I've had them come in. I've had does come right in like, oh, I got to watch this. A couple boys sparring, But they do work. I think that they work probably a little bit better in areas that have a higher deer density. But, I do use calls. I really love a doe and heat bleat. I've had extremely good luck with them. I was walking through a thick section. I had a call right in my pocket, and I walked through this thick stuff, and a deer blew at me very close, maybe 25 feet away. And I just reached in, grabbed that, and I turned that can over. Blah. And that deer turned around. It strutted back toward me, and then it spooked and blew and took a couple steps, and I could hear it. I couldn't see it. It was only about 25 feet. It was thick balsam. I was kind of pushing my way through it. And I just did it again, and this time the deer turned right around and came strutting right out. And, of course, I brought the gun up while I heard him coming. I said, this deer's coming. And he came right out and busted out of this thick balsam at 10 feet. And I've got the gun trained right on him, and I just raised my head and went bang.
Wow.
He went straight up in the air and took off. And it was a nice spike horn. The spike's about that long, but that call just eased his mind. He just thought, nope, that is a doe. And
Interesting.
And he finally turned around and said, no, where is she?
What gave you the confidence to try to call? Most people would have been, deer blew, that's done.
No, that's not always the case. Deer blows. It's not telling you that. It's just telling you, hey, something's disturbed me. It's amazing. I spotted a deer going up a hill. I just came up over a slight rise. This deer's going straight away. And I have a little call that I wear around my neck, the one I've been looking all over for and can't find. It's a doe and heat bleat. You should work with your mouth. You can actually, change its tone a little bit, but it's a nice little call. And I just, nah. And that deer spun right around and started right back down the hill. And I thought, wow, here it comes, you know. And I couldn't tell at that point whether it was a buck or a doe. When it got down fairly close to me, I said, it's a doe, big doe. And she walked right up and looked me all over. And, you know, I looked all around. I watched her for quite a few minutes. And then finally I said, well, there's no buck in tow there. And I whispered to her, where's your boyfriend? She just kind of looked at me. And I said, you don't have a boyfriend? What does she do? She puts her head down and starts feeding.
How close were you?
She was about 15 feet from me.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and she just went to feeding. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. You never know with deer, you know?
Yeah.
But it was the doe and heap lead. She just turned right around, came right down the hill.
Huh.
Yeah. When you're still hunting, try to avoid doing what I'm having to do. If you can keep your hands fairly close to your body, you show up a whole lot less. But I have to. I'm pulling myself along and steadying myself by reaching my arms out. When you go out 90 degrees and hold on to a tree, just pick that up quickly. But I can't do anything about it. It's just, if you can still hunt more, your hands inside your body, you're way better off. This buck, he hit that 3 or 4 years in a row, that same rub, but he's not here now. He had it freshened a little bit last year, but he seems to be gone. And it may have been that nice buck I killed. This sign was showing up every year, and I was like, wow, I got to get this buck on camera, and I never did get him on camera. I had a camera on that beach over there, and I got a doe, a big doe, in the ear of a bear, but I never got the big buck on camera. It was a little late when I put the camera in, and he was already chasing does.
When we were walking up here, I was thinking, there's no way there's deer up here. Jim just wants to get to the top of the mountain just to say he did it, but there's deer up here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're not kidding, there is. You know, though he's gone, there's a runway right over here, Cody, and you'll see, I bet you there's a scrape on it, or somewhere right near it. Oftentimes, what I like to do is I go high, and I work my way around a slope, and I'm looking down in, and you're not even sure where the wind is going once it leaves you. If it's dropping precipitously down, the wind could go right above deer, and I found it to be an excellent way to still hunt, and have killed quite a number of bucks doing that. And certainly I take the wind into consideration, and I'll give you a perfect example. I had a buck I really wanted. I knew where he was bedding. He liked the backside of this mountain, and I really was looking for snow, something to cover my sign. And I got a good buddy that, the only guy in the world I'd call at 4 o'clock in the morning to find out if it snowed in Pacifico, you know. I'll call him. He's like, hi, Jim. Because he's a highway guy. He runs he's retired now, but at the time he ran the county highway, and so he had to get up at 3 and check the weather and make sure crews were going if it was snowing and all that stuff. So, you know, no place else in the world would you call that early, yeah. He says, hi, Jim. I said, you get snow? He goes, yeah, it's about 2 inches up here. That's all I needed, thanks, Kenny. You know, and away I went. I drove up. I walked in the dark. I went all the way up top of the mountain. Wind was blowing, not completely steady, but it was strong, and it was blowing, and there was good snow. Really nice, quiet going. But when I got up on the ridge, you know, I wanted to drop over the top and work my way along, but the wind was in the wrong direction. I said, well, you can't do that, Jim. I walked the full length of the ridge on this side, and then I dropped over the ridge and headed back in the other direction because, the wind was such that it was quartering but coming in my face, kind of coming upslope and quartering into my face. And it was pretty strong wind, and you don't want to ignore these things. I mean, you're blowing your scent right to them if you're not in the right direction. And so, it was fully light by then, and I just worked my way along. It was fairly thick, mixture of hardwood, softwood, a lot of small, short balsam in there, big, high hardwood, and some understory, and a few big hemlocks mixed in there. Good bedding cover. It was a pretty nice area. And I knew the mountain very well. I knew where they like to bed, but it could be anywhere on this side of the mountain. And so I would move with the wind. The wind would blow very strongly, and I'd move 4, 5, 6 steps. When the wind would stop, I would stop. It also 4 or 5 steps is enough to have a whole new area to look at. And then I would just stand there and I'd study everything. You're not looking not so much for a deer, maybe part of a deer, maybe a color, maybe it's a horizontal object that could be a log but maybe isn't, and or a rock, or any number of things like that. Sometimes it's just, was that white I saw? Is that white? And then you study it, and then you go, yeah, you know what, that is white, and distinctly white. You see in some part of a whitetail or the rump or whatever. But at any rate, you look at everything. You scour the place looking for a deer, flick of an ear, any number of things. And then when you're sure everything that you've looked at, and then you wait for the wind to gust and move ahead. And it's a slow, very slow process. But you get lost in it, and it's enjoyable. And then I would move forward, and I just keep, and then, finally after 45 minutes or an hour maybe, working this side of the hill, wind blew. I took 4, 5, 6 steps over, stopped next to a small balsam. I just kind of stepped around it. I looked down the slope. There's this beautiful buck bedded facing down the slope. And I squatted so that I could put my elbows on my knees and put it right on him, and took him right in his bed. He never knew I was there. I levered it another round, and when you're sure that I wasn't shooting the horns off of him, I was very careful. I put another one right in the bread basket, and he was done. And I walked up on a fantastic 8-pointer with a 20-inch inside spread. Gorgeous buck, all full of bark where he'd been rubbing a tree, and all that kind of an orangey colored striped maple underbark. Beautiful buck. Well, what a thrill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a way to go for that deer too. Didn't even have a chance to get stressed.
No, he had no clue.
Had a bad dream.
Did not know I was there.
Up.
Yep, boom. Yep. Yeah, and, those are times you don't forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's fair to say that you're more interested in the environment that you kill your bucks in. You want a fair chase, big mountain bucks, and you'd rather take a smaller 8-pointer than, hunt a cornfield or something like that and get a big 10.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I wouldn't love to kill a nice 10-pointer in a cornfield. It's just, it's not my type of hunting. I love the mountains. I love to be here in the Adirondacks. We don't have the density that they have in the southern tier, but I wouldn't want to hunt anywhere else. I love it. And there's some big monster bucks. And the one good thing about cameras is, and you put cameras around in some of these places back in, and you look at the camera and you go, oh my goodness, what a monster. Yeah. And I did that a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago. I found a monster on my camera, and I said, wow, that is a buck. I mean, that is a real heavy buck, big, huge body on him. And he had a tremendous rack, 10-point, but really a nice rack. And I just got him on the camera the one time, and he sassed around there pretty good, and I got a pretty good look at him. And I'm going, wow, way out beyond the ears, that's a beauty. And so, it's like, I'm going to keep hunting him. I know at least he's been here once, and it wasn't right in the middle of the rut, so it was somewhere close to his home range, just to, if you want to call it that. And so I didn't see him again on camera. 2 years later, I killed him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In every area, some grow bigger than others. Our area does not have a reputation for, growing huge bucks, but still some beauties. And, this one would be, that's a beautiful buck. And he's one that I had him on camera 2 years before I killed him. And I only saw him just the one time. He showed up on a camera. And, I sized him up and said, wow, that is a really nice buck for this neck of the woods. And, just by God's grace, I was able to kill him a couple years later. But he'd been chasing a doe. I was quite sure it was him because of the size of the foot. And I thought I had him figured out, and I did, except that what happened was I was following him in the snow, and as he tailed to go around the top of that mountain that we were on, I knew where the does liked to bed down on the other side of that mountain. And I just left his track and I ran all the way back to the other end of the top of the mountain and cut across. And I was going to just sit down on the edge where I could see down into that hardwood. And it's full of fancy ferns, and the snow was 5-6 inches deep, and the deer were into them pretty heavily. And the does bed on that side of the mountain. And I was just going to get down in where I could see him patrolling around there looking for a doe. And I was quite certain that was where he was headed. And I hustled over there. Of course, when you do this, you're just moving along, trying to get into position, and that's what I was doing. And when I came, I was within 30, 40 feet of where I wanted to sit. And unfortunately, there were already does bedded there. A big doe jumped up right in front of me and blew and then ran right in the direction that buck was going to come from. And, I would just shook my head and said, "You fool." And, I stood there for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I followed her track. I don't think she went 75 yards, and we came upon his big track, and he was coming exactly the way I had expected him to. And of course, he turned 90 degrees and down off the mountain. But I said, I'll go back in and I'll get him, maybe get him the next day. And so I was heading back in super early, climbing up the mountain, and saw a doe coming down through. I said, "Wow, that's a nice one." And I slid off my pack, which I often do, and just sit on it, because you need a decent rest if you're going to kill a buck. And sometimes that's a tree that's handy, but oftentimes it's elbows on your knees. And so that's what I did. And I could tell right away, as soon as I got better looks at her on her way down through there, she was prancing and looking behind her and kind of moving her tail side to side. I said, "She's right in heat. There's a buck on her." And pretty soon, this guy showed up. You try not to look at the horns, You just assess that's a shooter, and then you focus on the body and you get him. And I was fortunate enough to kill him. And then when I walked up to him, I was just like blown away. And, I knew that was him right away. I moved his rack around a little bit. These back tines are a little shorter than these ones, and that's exactly the way he was 2 years before when I had him on camera. But the body was unbelievably impressive. And, I dragged him down because I was on my way up and it was all downhill and there was good snow. And I said, "Well, I'm an old man, but I think I can kind of steer him and let him slide." And I think it was maybe a mile or mile and a half, but it was all downhill. And I was able to slide him down. And then it was like, how am I even getting this thing in the truck? But the reason I wanted to bring him out, I wanted to weigh him, because we don't get, our bucks run, a good mature buck, 150 to 175 or 80 pounds. It's not like Maine, they have a lot of bucks that run over 200 pounds. And sometimes you look at the buck and the rack is small and the body is massive. But here, our bucks run, a little bit less in weight. And this guy was just an absolute bruiser. And So I figured out a way to get him on the truck. There was a pile of stone from an old stone fence way down in the lower part of where I came from, and I was able to pull him up onto that, back my tailgate up, slide him in. But I got him home and I weighed him, and the scales tipped exactly right on 200 pounds, which is an enormous buck for this country. And you know, his rack is gorgeous. Scored 142, which I don't really score him. I mean, I did score him because I wanted to know what he was, but just great to get him. You know, I think a lot of these bucks would be around 100 scoring, and some of them, you know, up into the 120s, but it takes a really big buck to get up in the 140s, and I was thankful to get him.
So how do you decide what days you're going to go hunting? How much does the forecast play, moon, all that kind of stuff play into your choices?
Sometimes the days you hunt are the days that you're not, you don't have to work. You know, I mean, and you know, if it's hunting season, and you know, obviously there's some family obligations and other things, but certainly work is part of that. I'm getting to a point now where I'm contemplating retirement, and you know, I still have tons to do for sure, but you know, work certainly dictates when you can hunt. But if I have my choice, you know, I love a day with a little light rain. I like a day when a front maybe is going to come through, and you know it's going to be deer know when it's going to be heavy snow or heavy rain, and they move before the storm. And you know, if you wake up in the morning and it is socked right in and it is coming down in buckets, or it's snowing like crazy, don't go out. I'm not telling you won't kill one, but you're going to have to step right on them, because they bed down and they hang low in really bad weather. If it's light rain, great day to hunt. I really like to hunt in the rain. Light rain, I think that deer feel secure in that darkened environment in the woods, and you can catch them feeding. I killed a lot of bucks on a rainy day. That beautiful buck I shot last year we had a terrible dry fall last year, and you couldn't find a wet leaf in the woods. It was just crunch, 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 and that's not a still hunter's dream, believe me. And you know, I have always been a still hunter. I've killed more bucks on the move than anything else, but you know, at some point you get old, and I have gotten old, and I have some physical issues. And so over the years I've modified, and you know, when you understand and know the mountain you hunt, and you know the country well, there are certain areas that the bucks pass through. I don't care what generation it is. I don't care if you've been hunting 25 years, that mountain, same areas the bucks use them. And you know, you can make a little ground blind in some of these areas on the right spot, and you know, you have to think them through and hunt them at the right time. You know as well as I do, Cody, you may not feel the thermals, but the thermals are out there. And you know, in the they come down off the mountain in the evening, and in the morning they're working their way up, you know, as the sun's coming up, and it's a slow stream. And so, you know, when you set these watches up, if you're going to be there in the morning, you have to take that all into consideration. But you know, you put a good ground blind in these locations, and then you can stop there, whether it's 20 minutes, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a little longer, depends on how you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, but and I have a lot of them in different places. I've got ground blinds in that Siamese Ponds country that's further back than I can hunt now, and I would love to get back in there just to sit in one for a little while. And
It was awesome. Just, you know, we'd be still hunting, moving through, and then get to a nice ground blind, eat a sandwich, and they're always in beautiful scenic views with nice, you know, funnels where I totally can see the deer moving right through that area, and enjoy a little break and get up and move on to the next one. I like that approach.
yeah, and you know what? Some of the best locations are not where you can see the furthest. Whitetails like cover, and some of my ground blinds might seem a little bit tight, but they're there for a purpose. I know exactly why I have the blind where it is. Some of them you can see a ways, but those are areas that Maybe there's a crease in the mountain or whatever it might be. But they're there for a purpose. They're in the right location, and so I spend some time in them. And as they get older, more time in them. But your bucks will scent check. You know, they have a trail that is parallel to wherever the does are predominantly going through. And these areas never change. And I know both sides of those things, depending on what time of the day it is when they come through and they just patrol through and they can scent check, you know, because your thermals are running to them, what side they happen to be on. They orient themselves in that fashion so they can smell as they go through, or if the wind is that way, same thing. They get the wind in their nose and they go parallel, but they're in what they would call a safe zone. They're not right where all the deer travel is, and they're more protected, and they can go through and scent check the area and go right on through.
Yeah, it's good to understand that, you know, the deer are not just using wind and thermals for their own safety. They're using that, and they're in tune to that all the time because they're looking for other deer.
Absolutely, they're looking for does and heat. This time of year, boy, they're cruising. Deer smell like they're in heat before they're ready to breed, and that's when the bucks go crazy. And oftentimes I've told you, some of those places where I sit, I have had a doe that was, she was dripping, obviously, and the buck said, "Man, I want you bad," and she wasn't ready to breed. Until she's ready to breed, she's not going to stand for it. And she came charging through, big, beautiful doe, and I threw the rifle up. I said, "The buck's got to be right behind her," and he wasn't far behind. And I wasn't interested in his rack. It was kind of a gnarly thing that came forward. And so I swung on him, but I didn't shoot. But it was thrilling. They went right by me. I said, "Wow, that was something, a buck chasing a doe." And 15 minutes later, I heard crash, 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 and I spun my head around, and here's the same pair. They went down around the mountain somewhere. She turned around and came back and ran back across this section that I was on right behind me. This time I stood up. She spotted me right away and turned and kind of ran. And the buck saw her go that way, and he just cut the corner and ran right past me, 10 feet from me. I got a rifle in my hand, standing up, and he was oblivious. Ran past me. And
yeah, that's my range, 10 feet. I could have got that one.
and I just said, "Wow, what a day," You don't have to harvest a buck. These things are beautiful. You're back in God's creation. You get to witness this kind of stuff. It's priceless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. When I say if the food is good, they're here, even if there's not water. I really mean obvious water. Bucks and does know where the water is, even if it's a very small source, and much better than we do. And we may look at the whole place and say, "No place to get a drink up in here," and yet there are a few places, and if the feed is good, they're there anyways. If there were no water, they would not be there. Last year, I went in on that. It was the one day it rained. I said, "I'm going in." So I went in the rain and got up on the mountain, sat down, and then the fog rolled in. I said, "This is great." You see about 50 feet, and I said, "Well, I'd rather be here than home." And so I just said, maybe it'll clear out, the fog will blow off, and it did. It actually the fog rolled into the valley, and the valley was full of fog, and up on the mountain was pretty clear. And I said, "A good time to start still hunting." And the rain had kind of tapered off, but everything was really wet. And so I did pretty basically what we were doing, but this is obviously a different area, but just started still hunting. I was high. Could go to these overlooks and kind of look down into the hardwood, and then I'd pussyfoot along. I was kind of in a band of hemlocks, and then I'd go a little further and look down in. And I've been doing that about 45 minutes or a little bit longer maybe. And I stepped up to a point where I could see down in the hardwood well, and I watched. You got to study these spots for a long time. And I was probably looking at it about 10 minutes, just looking at everything in there. And then I turned my head to the right, and I looked down in. I could see pretty good down that way. And I was watching for probably about 10 minutes, and then I just brought my head back, and something's different. And I just threw the scope to my shoulder, and sure enough, a buck had stood up down in there. And, he's kind of looking up. I don't know whether he saw me. I have no idea, but I knew he wasn't going to hang around long. he'd been bedded down in there, and he stood up, and I put it right on him. It was about 70 yards, and that's a long ways offhand. I didn't have anything to rest it on. I said, it's now or never, and I put it on him, and there's a process. You don't just yank the trigger. You're drawing in a breath and holding it, and then you're concentrating on keeping the crosshairs right where they go, and you're not consciously. You are drawing back on the trigger, and the gun goes off when it's ready to go off. And if you jerk it, you're going to throw the shot. It's just like shooting from a bench. You're working the trigger in, and my Model 88, one of the knocks on those old 88s, people said, yeah, they had a lousy trigger. Well, that's not the case with mine at all. I wouldn't hunt with it if it had a lousy trigger. Mine breaks clean, probably at 3.5 pounds or a little bit more, maybe 4, but it's clean. And, you just start to bring back on it, boom, it goes off when it's ready to go off. It should be not a surprise, but you shouldn't be the one going, and the shot was good. I always tie flagging on right where I took the shot, and then I try to keep my eyes focused right where the deer had stood and walk right to it, find where the deer either was bedded or standing, and usually if you hit them, you usually see a burst of hair or whatever, but I always tie flagging right there. Then I have those 2 points locked in. Well, this happened to be, I think if I was a young man, maybe I could have just straight down off of there, but it was steep, and my hip was probably not as bad as it is now, but not good. So I had to kind of zigzag down the hill, which very hard to keep your eyes focused on one point when you're kind of hand over hand down through and back and forth. I got down in there, and then I kept having to look back up. At least I had the flagging where I shot from. And so I'm trying to judge distance in my mind. I'm going, I think I got to go a little further. I think it ended up it was around 70 yards down the hill. And so I kept going down, looking back up, and trying to find, I think he stood up out of a bed. Maybe you find a dry bed. Maybe you find where his feet dug in when he took off. And so I just went a little bit further, and then I looked to my left, and I said, wait a minute. I see something white down through the trees. Usually white is not a normal color in the woods. Fairly large splash of it. I threw the scope up to see if maybe it was the underside, the belly of the buck. Couldn't tell, it's just too much brush. And so then I kind of angled left and started towards it. And, I'm thinking, do I tie some flagging right here? And then I went about 30 feet and threw the scope up again, and it was like, yes, it's him. And there you can see the belly sprawled up in that huge rack above it. And I said, oh, thank you, Lord. And then when I came back up out of there after I took the whole buck apart, took a bunch of pictures, took him all apart, then I did spot the bed. It was just a little lower where I left the track. It was maybe 20 feet below it. It was a bone-dry bed, and there was another one below him. So there's a doe. He was with a doe, and they were bedded in there. I never saw the doe, but thank the Lord I was able to take them.
Can you explain that bedding area? How high up on the mountain was it? Do you find them facing certain side? Certain.
Well, you find deer where they are, and basically, it's an area. This particular area is an area I like to hunt. It's pretty thick, but you can see down in there fairly well. Bucks and does, they like cover when they breed. It was right when the time of, right in that stage where deer seem to almost disappear in the rut, and that's because they're with a doe and they're breeding. And I'm sure that she was either ready or going to be ready very shortly, and they were together. And it's an area that they like to use. I've killed 3 bucks in there. And it's a good area. But
what is it, balsam?
No, it's mostly open. It's hardwood, but there's a lot of stuff mixed in with it. And, top of the ridge has got, some softwood mixed in. And it's one of those places where you can work your way along and then work your way out and look down in and maybe come back so that you're not silhouetting yourself along the ridge as you go, and then go a little bit, because you looked all this country over. Don't give them an opportunity to see you above, back out, go a little bit further, come back out onto it. Right. Now you're looking.
Yeah. I noticed you doing that. We'd be on a ridge. You'd kind of go in, loop out, that motion.
Now you got a whole new vista, and, there's no reason to walk the edge of the ridge and let everything down there see movement. So you go out, you get a look, you spend a few minutes looking at it, And depending on conditions, sometimes you can scan an area fairly quickly. Other times it takes a little bit longer. And by God's grace, I was able to get him. And just
I remember talking to you on the phone, and you were telling me about tracking a deer in leaves. And I remember at that point, I thought, how does he track a deer, like a mile or plus in leaves? And I remember telling other people, like, and it felt like a superhuman strength. But once I start following you, I'm seeing those leaves are a little bit wetter on one side. I'm seeing the leaves getting pushed down. And once you start pointing out, I can see how tracking deer in leaves is possible.
That particular deer was a big dominant buck. I mean, you can follow them, boy. I tell you, they swagger. They got a lot of weight. They push leaves out of the way. Clearly on patrol, going somewhere. And you can follow them pretty readily, almost as quickly as you can on snow. And that particular day it was wet, a lot of rain. And boy, he was leaving. It was easy to track, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people miss that opportunity to track in leaves like that, and we think we gotta wait for snow, but it was, like you said, it was just as easy.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, not just as easy, but
pretty
it's
close.
It's doable. You can see
doable.
that. You can see that, like when you look down, through that forest, you can see that clear track. It's almost easier to see at a distance. Sometimes
it can be, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes when you're going, where is his track? Look up.
Yeah.
You go,
down.
That is him right there. And you're right. There's a little bit more distance. You can see that disturbance. And close up sometimes it's not quite as rev.
Yeah. Especially in the case where we were the other day where the sun is starting to dry the leaves, but as soon as those leaves got turned, and then you can judge how recent that track is simply by how wet that tree is. Mm-hmm. And I found even just tracking you, letting you get up ahead and not wanting to blow anything out of there and just look up, and I don't know where Jim is, but I'd be able to find your track and follow you, and you start to get used to that. Mm-hmm. Start to be able to see it.
Yeah, for sure. You see down there where those pieces of stuff are standing on end? That's parts of the blowdown that I moved, and there was a big crotch in there that it's still there, but some of the cover on the sides is rotted away and fallen down. But sitting right there, you look out into that open hardwood right where they come off of around that knob, and that 10-pointer came right to me. And it was interesting because when I came up the other side of that, in the morning, I cut a fresh track in the leaves. I studied it for a minute and watched you can tell a lot about a deer by where he places his feet. And a big buck will place here and then stagger the step a little bit wider, whereas a doe puts one foot in front of the other, and it appears even in the leaves to be a single dotted line, and a bigger buck will walk, and it'll look more of a staggered gait as it goes because of the width of the chest. And they just walk different. A doe walks a little daintier and puts one foot right in front of the other, and a big buck does not do that. And I looked at the track and I said, that's a buck on patrol. He's going on that piece. I said, I think I'll sit for an hour in the blowdown stand. And just a little while later, killed a nice 10-pointer. If a buck knows you're on them, I mean, yes, they will circle. They want to know what's after them. And oftentimes, when you're following a buck, they will sometimes, they're going someplace. But when you start to see their track meander just a little, you better be looking carefully because they're probably browsing. And if a buck has been browsing, he's going to bed down. They have to chew their cud. And it's not like, gee, I should chew my cud. They have the urge. They have to lay down and chew their cud. And so if he's been feeding and he keeps meandering, he's going to bed. And so oftentimes what they will do is, they don't bed right where they're feeding probably, but they will, if they can find a patch of open hardwood, really open, they'll go through it. Now, if it was morning and you wanted to be able to protect yourself, and just think about the scenarios here in a buck's mind. If what a buck will do oftentimes is if they're going to bed down, they will lay down to track that they can see visually in front of them. and then they'll bed with their back to the wind. So now they're protected because something comes from the rear. They smell them coming, okay? And visually, they can watch their own track. Now, I told you about a young buck. I don't know. I think I started to tell you a story about it anyways. I'm following him, and he started browsing. And I was quite sure it was a young buck just by the way he walked. And then he started browsing, and then he kind of came out of that stuff. It was a little more open. And then the mountain is very steep right there. And there's one spot you can go down because it's kind of ledgy. But you can go down the steep chute. It's all wide open hardwood, and it breaks right into really open hardwood. And his track turned and went right straight down through there. And I just smiled to myself and said, he's not going down in that hardwood to do anything but leave a track. And he's going to just make a loop. And he's right here. He's to my left. He's in these ledges. He's up in these ledges. I'm positive of it. That's what he's done. He's gone in there. He's laying out a back track. Now, it's not always that he's laying down a back track for, see if a guy comes along behind him. Coyotes follow deer all over the place, and they're a total nuisance. And they protect themselves by watching their back track. And so I see the track going down, and I'm going, yeah, and I can already see it starting to lean to the left. So he's setting down a track. So I just forget all about his track, and I turn 90 degrees, and I just start death creep. I mean, just super slow, working into the edge of these ledges. I'm at the top of where this drops off, and I don't think it was 15 minutes, less than that, 10 minutes, maybe 15. But, I didn't cover much ground. I'm talking maybe 100 feet, maybe 150 feet to my left, just going right along the seam and watching right along that ledgy seam there. And, I just step a little bit further forward, and I go, there he is.
Wow.
Got his head up, looking right down at his back track, which looped around, and he came right up on the ledges and laid down. Wind is blowing nicely right down the hill at his back, and there he is, protected from both directions, except from the side where I'm coming. And I worked in. I could see that he wasn't a big, mature buck, but I wanted a better look at him, and I wanted to see, if I could get into a good position. And I did. I worked another 20, 30 feet in, and got my gun resting up against a tree and watching him through the scope. Got a beautiful crotch horn rack on him. Pretty good sized, bulky bodied buck. While I'm watching him, the wind shifted, and I felt it swirl, and then it just blew hard right at the back of my neck. And I just smiled and said, this ought to be good. And it only took a few seconds, and it was on him, and he just stood right up, looking all around like, what in the world? And he looked right back in my direction. I've got the gun resting up like that up against a tree, and he's staring in my direction, and I just went, hi. Like a missile, he was off the mountain. But I thought, wow, great day of hunting.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. That's great just to be able to see that with your own eyes and know, there's no question they watch their back tracks. And like you said, it might be deer that are in predatorial areas.
Yeah. I followed them a number of times, and I know I was, again, back in the Siamese country, working my way along, and I cut this big track. I go, oh boy, that's a nice one. That's a nice buck. And I was just turning him right on him, About a half hour later, he comes out of this good cover that he's meandering through at a pretty good clip, and out across this big open stretch. I'm going, no. I seldom come to a spot where a buck goes right through a big open patch where I don't question whether he's buttonholed somewhere and is watching. And sometimes they'll go to where they are, and they'll just stop and look back through the hardwood, wait for a few minutes, see if there's anything on the trail. But this buck's track went right through, and I said, I'm not going out in that open hardwood. I stuck to the cover that it was kind of similar to what I was in. I worked my way up the hill, and there was a slight breeze, and it was blowing down the hill. And I said, well, I'm not going out across that open. I'm going to go up in here, and I'm going to work. I'm going to assume that maybe the buck has gone through the hardwood and buttonholed right up onto that higher ground where there's a little bit of softwood, and maybe he's going to lay down and watch his back track while he chews his cud or something. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. But I didn't catch him. He caught me before I got to him. But I had him pegged. That's where he was. And he blew and took off.
Is that the most difficult time to stalk in on a deer is when he's bedded?
Yeah, I would say it is. I mean, I can't think of a more. I mean, sometimes a deer will bed down. He's got his head down. Sometimes they're exhausted, and
Like, do they actually sleep?
yeah, they do.
So you could catch a deer sleeping.
Well, I had a good friend. He was a trapper. He's like me. We were mink trappers, and he was constantly in the woods. And he told me the story, and I know the guy well. It's a true story. I mean, he just jumped out of his truck, grabbed a .22 rifle because he usually carries one with him, and he said, that's stupid. I don't need the rifle. I'm only going a little ways down over the bank. And so he stuck it back in the truck, and he said, I just had a belt axe in my hand. And he said, I started down over the hill, and he said, I didn't go 50 feet, and I'm looking in total stunned. There's a buck bedded right in front of me, facing me, with his eyes closed. Wow. And he's just like nodding. And he said, I was only like 15 feet from him. I walked right up to him, and he said, I thought, boy, I hit him with this, and he comes up out of there, I might get gored. He said, it's a beautiful buck. And he said, I just brought the axe down to my side. And he said, he just exploded off the ground. He said, I about jumped through my skin but he was sound asleep. He said, if I'd ever had a rifle, I'd had the easiest shot in the world. Wow. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting story. The fact that this buck maybe been chasing does. He said he was like heavily breathing, but out cold. I mean, his eyes closed and head down and then up. And
yeah,
I thought, wow, that's
I mean,
really interesting.
They gotta sleep. And I had asked you earlier, like, what time of the day are deer most likely bedding, and you said, what makes you think they're bedding during the day?
Which way do they face when they're bedded in the middle of the day? And I said, what makes you think they're bedded in the middle of the day? So many factors that are involved in that. I've definitely killed more bucks between 11 and 2 in the afternoon than any other time, especially when the bucks are in rut and they're on the move. And we talked a little bit about the moon. Yeah. I think the moon is a major factor. And, I wouldn't get carried away with any of that stuff. I don't like charts that tell you this is a lousy day of hunting because people don't go out. They go, oh, I'm not going today. Yeah. Or when they go out, they go, well, I'm not going to see anything today. Yeah. If you're not intent on what you're doing and you're not really locked in, you're not going to do well. Yeah. And so I think it can be a deterrent, but it also can be an aid. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only time the bucks are on the move. But, when the moon is fully overhead, full moon during the day, when it's fully overhead, they've shown scientifically that it causes deer to be on the move. They got to get on their feet. And so, if that arrives at midday, bucks will be on the move. Now, when the does are in heat, no matter what's going on, they're on their feet and they're after does. That's just the way it is. And kill a lot of them middle. And, we talk about pre-rut and mid-rut. I like to find a buck in his habitat. When you find rub lines, scrapes, whatever, this is all setting up for the rut. This is bucks in their territory. But when the rut's on, I mean, does get into heat, they're moving around, looking for does.
Right. Those are put in place for when they haven't found one yet. But the moment they find one, they're on their tail and they're pulling.
Yeah, so they can be a long ways from that sign. If you can catch them early. I know one buck I had found this. I crested this mountain, and just off the peak in the hardwood is a rub line. I mean, a good rub line. I was like, wow, this is a nice buck. All directionally faced, going the same way, rubbing all these trees, one right after another. And I'm looking it over and going, that's bedding cover. I said, I bet you he's patrolling does at night. It was, when the moon's out, the bucks are, oftentimes they are moving at night. And then you think, wow, there's not a deer in the countryside. But, they're resting after feeding or chasing a doe during the night and whatever. And I said, this rub line I think has been done in the morning. and he's going into bedding cover because I knew that to the left was a lot of bedding cover. And I said, it was maybe 150 feet down from the crest of this hill. I said, not a bad spot for a ground blind, just to sit in the morning. So I looked things over a little bit and I said, there's a pretty good fallen tree over there. And I just worked my way over there. It was perfect. I mean, I didn't have to do that much and made a nice ground blind out of it where I could look down 100 feet or so below me and see this clear rub line going that way. And, I was pretty busy with a job, so that it was weekends that I was hunting. And I said, I'll hunt the rest of the day. And next Saturday morning, I'll be here. I'll come in the dark and I'll hike up on the mountain and I'll get up in there. And just as it's cresting light, I'll work into that blind. I'll sit there for a few hours and see what happens. And so that's the very first time I was in the stand. I got to the top of the mountain and it was light, but not light. You couldn't see definition yet. And I said, there's no reason to crash down in there in the dark. I'll just wait until it's fully light and I'll slowly work my way down when I'm sure there's nothing within sight. And I'll slide right into that blowdown. I was in that blowdown about 45 minutes and along came this nice 10-pointer walking right along that rub line. Boom. Had him. I said, wow, it's great to guess right once in a while, Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. They bed just off of that. Now the wind, sometimes there is no wind. Sometimes there is a slight breeze. But what they're doing is they're getting where the thermals are coming up the slope because oftentimes, they're a creature of habit and they know that the lower lands, that's where guys come in off the road and they work their way into the woods and maybe they go back and forth. But they go high and they bed down. And then if they smell people coming up through in those thermals, they get up and they leave. If they don't, they feel pretty secure. But they are leaving their back wide open because danger doesn't generally come from there. It comes from down on the road. You have to, every spot is a little bit different, Cody, depending on how close to a road you are and how often that gets hunted. And so these bucks, they're in tune to all that. And I had a spot that I've hunted a lot when I was running. I won't tell you where it is, but it's a spot where I would go up in the dark. I'd spend about an hour and a half getting up in there and just still hunt right along, right on the top edge, watching down in. And I remember one year, I was a little disappointed because it was opening day, but I was working my way along. There was a frost, and it was a hard frost. And when I got to the top, the sun hadn't hit it yet, and it was crunchy. So I said, no sense in being in a rush. I'd just stand here and let that sun soften these leaves a little bit. I think I waited about 20 minutes, half an hour, took a few steps. I said, it's pretty good. It was quieted down with that bright morning sun coming right in on it. And I started still hunting very, very slowly along that top, looking just down off the crest. And I maybe went maybe a quarter of a mile doing that. It took a little while, but I step around a tree and I look and I see this, characteristic round object, right color. It looks like a deer bedded. And rather than try to glass it, I had a spot where I could sit and I had a small sapling there. And I said, there's no sense in looking at it offhand at this distance, about 80, 90 yards. I said, I'll just sit right there and bring my gun up and put it right alongside of the tree so I have a good rest. And when I did that, I looked through the scope. I'm looking at this body of a deer and a beautiful rack sitting right above it. And I just drew the crosshairs down and pulled the trigger. And it just rolled over and kicked a couple times. Beautiful 10-pointer.
Well, I think we're both feeling like it's time for supper. But I do have two more questions that I think that are important. What do you think? There's certain people that have a poor judgment of hunters. There's a lot of bad representation of hunting and hunters. What advice can you give to other hunters and younger hunters to help us change that perspective of what it means to be a hunter and what is hunting?
Well, yeah, there's a whole lot of things. Sometimes I'll see a guy wearing a happiness as a steaming gut pile with a pile of guts on a shirt. It's just ridiculous. you and I aren't offended by it, but a lot of people are. And why do you do that? Why should, you shouldn't do that. Um, I know there's a lot of farmers that, badmouth hunters. It's generally because hunters have not treated their land correctly. They go in, they ask permission, they go in there, and then they leave gates open, they throw litter around, and steaming gut piles in the middle of their tractor roads. You just don't do that, If you're fortunate enough to a guy give you permission, you don't gut your deer in the middle of the roadway. Get it off in the brush somewhere, and then don't leave any litter around, and don't leave gates open, and treat the land with respect. And then, when you harvest something, don't throw the thing over the hood of your truck, blood running down both sides, and or putting him in the back of a pickup and dragging the head up and tying it to the rack so that everybody, what you're doing is, people that aren't used to hunting, they see that and it turns them off. And, guys that sit in a bar room and brag about, I killed this one and, oh man, you should. It gives hunters a bad name. And you know what? God gives us an opportunity to be back in there enjoying this country. You get a nice buck, it's a bonus. And, to think that we're solely on our own and boy, I'm a great hunter. It's just not the right way to think about it at all. Thank God that you're able to get out there and do it and that you harvested one.
When you look around today at younger hunters, what do you think that younger hunters are getting wrong, and what advice would you give them?
Well, first off, we live in such I want to call it an urbanized society. I mean, kids don't get any training in going in the woods or doing anything like that. They're all stuck in a cell phone or a screen of some sort. And then if they do become interested in such things as hunting, they've got a cell phone, and maybe it's cell cameras, maybe it's any number of things, GPS, and maybe that's what they need for their comfort level or whatever, but they spend a lot of time with their face in a screen, and you're way better off spending the time without that stuff in the woods, and let the deer teach you, and follow deer wherever they go, and really learn the woods. There's really not a shortcut to becoming good at it. It's being a woodsman, coming up with an understanding of everything within the environment. And, if you know deer, you understand what they do, how they react, what they feed on, where they live, and all those issues. Follow them and get better and better and better at it. And be very careful about technology, because it can be your friend. It can also be your enemy. And I think I've watched young men in the woods, and they got their nose in the screen way too much. And, you need to, learn to, I'm an old man, so I can't practice what I preach quite as much as far as walking and looking at everything, because, as I need to have my hip replaced, and I have to be deliberate where I put my right leg down. And then sometimes my left leg betrays me because that hip's in bad shape. But, the point is, if you can, you want to try to, a man walking in the woods in dry leaves is pretty much a man walking in the woods in dry leaves. That doesn't mean you can't kill a buck. You can. But, you want to try to make yourself, deer know, they hear noise. They know that something is coming. If you can make yourself sound a little bit more like a deer, I would. But, if you're a young man, you're pretty sure-footed, keep your eyes up. Don't look at your feet all the time. And be aware of everything around you as you're moving through the woods. And you'll see a lot more deer than I think the normal gait would be, to have your eyes looking just ahead of you on the ground. And if you don't have to do that because of age or whatever, then I would say practice keeping your head up and watching around you as you go. You'll see you may not kill them, but you'll see more deer for sure. Yeah. And try to keep your head out of the cell phone.
Yeah.
They're definitely not your friend.
You've obviously acquired a lot of knowledge in hunting hunting whitetail bucks and whitetails in general. But this is just one small element of who Jim Abbott is. A lot of people will devote their whole life to just being a whitetail hunter. You're a carpenter. You own a carpentry business. You make beautiful baskets. You're a craftsman. You're a man of faith. You're very involved in the church. You're a great father, great husband. What's the secret? How have you managed to accomplish? You're an incredible fisherman. How have you managed to accomplish so much and be so skilled at so many different aspects of your life?
I'm not sure I fill all the accolades, but I'd like to say that I would hope my children would agree that I've spent time with them. I have, but I probably have spent more time than I should have chasing deer. I'm a type A personality, and I spent a lot of time trapping when fur was high. But I was making a living at it, and I was doing other things too, but fur was, you could make money off of it, and I'd been doing it a long time, so I was good at it, and so I concentrated a lot on it. I think my wife would tell you that I could have spent more time with her. My wife's a saint. She's a wonderful woman, and I've had the opportunity to, she's allowed me to, and go back in the woods 5 days at a time in a wall tent by myself. Before there were cell phones and no communication, Lori'd say, "Well, how do I know you're not getting hurt?" "I won't get hurt, hon. I've been doing this all my life. I'll be fine." But that causes your wife to worry.
Sure.
And there were times, I told you, the day I was supposed to come out, I shoot a bear. And, it was fairly late in the afternoon. I don't get out of there till 9 o'clock at night or 9:30, and skinning the bear with mini mag in my mouth 5 miles from the road. And my wife's at home worrying because I'm supposed to be out. Of course, she calls my boss, and, he says, "No, don't worry about Jim. Everything will be fine, And, Vic was right, but, she's been wonderful about it. And I remember, going in beaver trapping on skis in a snowstorm and making a huge loop and crossing the east branch of the Sacandaga and coming out on a different route and crossing another spot on a cable crossing, and, being way later than expected. The snow mounted up to over a foot of wet, heavy snow. My wife was worried sick. Well, when I got out the road at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, I'm thinking, what is that I'm hearing? And then I go, I think I even see a light. It's my wife. She's sitting in the car with it running on the other side of the river. And I kind of move a flashlight around. She's right out. "Is that you, hon?" I'm thinking, who else would it be over? She said, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "How come you're not coming across on the cable?" I said, "I'm resting." I was thankful to be out. But I got, you're in a snowstorm, and I catch 7 beautiful big blankets that day. And, you're rough skinning them and putting them in a pack, and you got all this extra stuff. I tied snowshoes to my pack because I knew the skis might load up with that heavy, wet snow. So now I've switched out, and I got the skis on the pack, and I'm wearing the snowshoes, but every 20 steps you got to knock a bunch of wet, heavy snow off of them. And exhausted. I remember the last pond I got to, I said, if there's a beaver in that trap, I'm going to leave it and get it on the next trip. And I cut the first hole out. There's a great big blanket. I said, I can't leave it. Pull it up out of there. The wind was blowing sideways and the snow was blowing. Pull him over into the balsam, strip the hide off him, throw another 10, 12 pounds on the pack because, rough skin blanket beaver is quite a bit. And I don't know what that pack weighed, but it was 100 pounds when I got out, I'm sure. But I was exhausted. Waited too long to eat my lunch. Ended up trying to eat it while I'm on the move and didn't set well. I had to spit it up, and it was a long day. But the point is, my wife was out at the road waiting for me and thrilled to see me and glad I was all right. But my wife has been super gracious. There were probably times where I could have spent more time with my children and wish I had. But the Lord's blessed me in many, many ways.
Well, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate this. You've been just an incredible source of knowledge for me and a mentor to me in both life, deer hunting, craft. I can't thank you enough for bringing me out to your cabin and taking me out to your hunting grounds. It means the world to me, and I'm just so honored to be here and so thankful on behalf of WeatherWool that you're you've been so supportive of the brand and sharing your knowledge with all of us.
I don't want anybody to think that I'm selling products. I'm not. I wear WeatherWool because I think it's the best wool product out there. I love it. I'm not paid to advertise for WeatherWool. You know, if I say something about a piece of gear, it's because I use it and I like it because it performs, and that's the way I feel about this product. But any other ones that you hear me talking about, I'm using it because I like it. I'm not advertising for anybody. But I'm very thankful for the life that God's given me, to be around after cancer, surviving it, and getting an opportunity to spend a little more time with my kids, my grandkids, and get out in God's creation and enjoy it. Nothing better in the world.
I love spending time with you too because the sun always shines a little brighter wherever you are. Thanks, Jim. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all.